Welcome to a special Liberal Conversation series of the Dissidents podcast. In this series, we invite guests who have resources, ideas, and viewpoints that will challenge us to reflect on liberal values, what they are, how they are applied, their impact on us as individuals, and why they matter for the larger communities in which we live. The Dissidents podcast is brought to you by the Institute for Liberal Values, a nonpartisan and non-sectarian consortium focused on the promotion of individual freedom, rights, and liberty in everyday life.
Hi, welcome to the ILV Dissidents podcast. Today, it's me, Elizabeth, with Zander Keig. Zander is the founder of Keig Consulting and an award-winning, I think multiple award-winning social worker. Am I correct on that? Multiple awards. He founded the LGBTQ Caregiver Center and volunteers for several caregiver and senior living organizations. His expertise spans from conflict mitigation, social services program implementation, and delivering dynamic personal wellness and well-being webinars, which is what we should talk about first. I want to give you a chance to talk about the ILV collaborative program that you're going to offer on well-being.
Absolutely. Well, it's good to be here. Yes, so let me first start by saying that I've been involved with the Institute for Liberal Values since its founding. I'm one of the founding board members of ILV, so it's been, a couple of years that we've been going along, and so I'm happy that we're making a lot more progress as of late and starting to offer a lot of programming. So my program is just one of very many that we are going to be offering. So it's called Know Thyself. It's a multi-classed course. So I believe there's 5 different classes in the course. It starts in October, and I'm going to be weaving together concepts that are helpful for people for self-development and self-recognition. So things like figuring out what your moral foundation is, what your worldview is, what your core values are. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to also, because I'm a social worker, I'm going to interweave into that how important it is to have certain social skill sets, personal, in order to navigate through all of the different trials and tribulations of life. So like we can know what our core values are and what our worldviews are, but we also need to know how to mitigate conflict and how to regulate our emotions and how to tolerate distress and making sure we're getting a good night's sleep. Those things are very important to our individual well-being, our family's well-being, our communities, our nations, and our world's well-being. So I'm going to be interweaving the well-being into the self-development course throughout that 5 weeks.
So I've been reading a lot about, just sort of coincidentally, about morality and our, as you're calling them, the moral foundations, and how difficult it really is not only to know what your moral core is. I mean, you sort of said, oh, well, everybody, I think it's sort of like maybe, everybody knows what pornography is. It's like, I'll know it when I see it. Sort of like, oh, I'll know my morals when I bump up against them. I'll know what they are. But it's actually harder than that. And it's really hard to, I've been reading, again, I mean, we could talk about it personally, but I've also just been reading how generally difficult it can be for people in the moment, maybe when there's some uncertainty, to really to express themselves, to hold, to be true to those values. And then, of course, as you say, like we're maybe very disappointed in ourselves afterwards, and maybe suffer a little bit when we don't follow through.
Yeah, being self-critical is very common. It's being able to be mentally fit is something that we can strengthen, just like we can strengthen our physical fitness. We can strengthen our mental fitness by getting into a regimen where we are practicing how to regulate emotions and tolerate distress and mitigate conflict and navigate through uncertainty because and manage our stress, because these are inevitable things that are going to happen through life. And so what we can do is we can take sort of lesser irritating circumstances and practice and build from there and practice and practice. We can do it also through visualization exercises. We can do it through practice exercises, so we can condition ourselves to become better equipped to navigate through the uncertainties, because they will come up time and time again. Right? The only certainty is uncertainty.
Right, right. And we have these, I mean, I get aggravated with people sometimes because they do a lot of, well, I would have, well, if that happens to me, I'll just, and
Yes.
it isn't that simple. It's just not. And again, to sort of not say that to other people, but then also not say that to ourselves. Well, why didn't I? And like you said, sort of practicing these things. So do you think in the class, will people be practicing with each other? Will you give them homework?
There will be homework. So the very first course is an overview or an introduction to the full course. And then there will be a homework assignment following that for the next week's course. So that there will be some not quizzes, but what would they be called? Like, if not, maybe evaluations of like going onto the internet and completing some short little quizzes and assessments to
Like thought
determine.
prompts and
Right. Well, to determine, right, there's a way to determine what your worldview is. There's a way to
mm,
determine what your moral foundations are using social psychology professor Jonathan Haidt's example of moral foundations, right? So it's like these quizzes exist online, so people can
mhm.
go and take them, answer some questions. It's sort of, similar to like a personality test where you answer questions, or Myers-Briggs, something like you answer questions and it gives you the results. Like, what is my primary way to deal with conflict? I answer some questions on a quiz. It tells me, here's your primary, here's your secondary way of dealing with conflict. And then, I like the idea of practicing. We have 1 hour for each course. Excuse me. We have 1 hour for each course. And so, there's getting through the material and engaging with the material, but there might not be a lot of time to practice.
in the
So
in
I'm
the
gonna
in the
in
one
the
hour. Yeah.
yeah, within the 1 hour. But I'm definitely going to encourage people to find somebody that they can practice with, maybe another person in the class or somebody in their family or friend circle who might like to, like, here, you do the quiz, you find out what your worldview or what your that core values are, and then they can have somebody that they can do that back and forth with, because it really does help to reinforce it.
Right.
The negative self-talk and the negative other person talk, oh, I would have done this, or you could have done this, or you should have done this. It's also a lot of, we want to feel like we have control, right?
Right.
We want to feel like if something happened to us, we would know how to handle it. And so, our mind wants us to think that as well, right?
Mhm.
It doesn't give us much confidence in ourselves if we sit there going, oh my gosh, I have no idea how I would handle that, right? That's not a good feeling for most people. But I think that going to that's sort of an extreme on the bottom edge of that. On the further going to the other extreme is thinking that how you would react. You know what the answers are. You know what the way to deal with something is for you and everybody else, right? It's more about somewhere in the middle of getting curious about, well, how would I react in a situation like that? Let me really play it out. And you can practice it in your mind. You could do visualizations of, okay, here's a scenario, this is what's going to happen, and this is how I'm going to react to it. And you can play it through all the way to the end and be like, let me try that again. You could do it over and over and over again. It's a really useful tactic that professional athletes use, law enforcement officers use. A lot of people use it to play out scenarios of how they would respond to things. And then, of course, you don't exactly know how you're going to respond to them, but you can get pretty close to good way of responding doing visualization practice.
Yeah, I mean, to use your sports example, for example, it's, like they do the same play over and over and over again. And no, they're never in exactly the same spot, right?
Yeah.
There's, the other team never moves exactly the way
Yeah.
you're your opposing line did. But if you practice it enough, then you have the ability to, you have the wiggle room. Also, you can make the adjustments, where when you're not
Yeah.
well practiced, it's more difficult to do that. And I think a lot of people are surprised to realize how similar moral foundations can be between people who are expressing them in, or understanding them in very different ways, or who need to hear them in different ways. I'm just going to use the environment for an example, where most everyone feels that that the earth, of course, the earth is going to survive, survive beyond us. Like, we'll destroy it and it'll still live. But just for the purposes of this discussion, most people are concerned about preserving the environment, being good to the earth, whatever that means. Where but people respond to that moral value in different ways, or respond to stimuli in different ways. So more progressive or liberal people tend to respond to calls for environmentalism through social programs, and talk about people who are in danger and those kinds of things, where more conservative people tend to respond to the sort of the impurity kinds of stimuli. So dirty water and trash, litter, those kinds of things. So one of the things that happens, I think, is that people don't realize that they actually have similar moral foundations. They're simply they don't respond to the same kinds of messages about those. And so it seems like we're on such different pages when we're really not.
Well, I think part of the issue can be that we have different motivations for why we're invested or involved in something. And if we expect that whatever motivates me to be involved in whatever it is I'm involved in, if I expect that everybody else who's involved in the same thing has the same motivation, and if they don't, their motivation is wrong, that's what gets us in trouble. It's like, I like your idea of the environment, because it's like, what motivates the people is going to be different. But what we should be focusing on is the stewardship of the land or the planet or God's creation, or, what I mean? Like, there's going to be different versions of why people, the sustainability, right? And so I don't know that it should matter. I think it's more important that the focus be on, let's say, the planet for this, or the land, the animals, the people on the land, the resources on the land. And then maybe the difference is, like, now you know how to market differently to get a cross section of people, right? It's like, use it to the advantage of, let's get a bunch of different people to come together to work on something that is going to benefit all of us. But the recruiting has to be done differently. The projects might need to be different. The places where people convene might need to be different. It's possible that you need even different organizations to be able to convene different people to work on different projects that all have the same goal of, cleaning the water or cleaning the air, or finding more humane ways to treat animals in the food production line. And it all matters. Yeah, I like that.
And we can play together.
Yeah, it's also core values. There's a lot of commonality in our values, but again, it's like, why we come to them, right? They're going to differ based on our culture, on our race, on our ethnicity, right? Our group affiliations. These are going to make a big difference in why it's important to us. And I think with moral foundations, what people will find out is that, it's this undergirding of motivation. It's like, why is it important? Why do I value? Why do I prefer? Why am I aligned with something? There's a very specific reason, and it's interesting how it does really split down the middle in a lot of ways. It's like, people who are more on the liberal or progressive side are motivated by things very differently than people on the more conservative or who are more religiously oriented. are motivated, but there's really no reason to begrudge the motivations.
Right. If we are pursuing similar, I mean, they don't have to be exactly the same, but
That's
sort of
right.
similar foundational values, then it's really it's not, it shouldn't be so important to us which direction
Yeah.
it's coming from.
Yeah,
So
because people get into arguments like, well, those people don't care about the planet. Well, those people don't care about families. I mean, these are gross overstatements.
yes,
It's just that it's the different values, different motivations.
sort of expressing themselves in different
Yeah.
ways. Yeah. So one of the things on your list, I wanted to ask you about the format a little bit
Uh-huh.
more, but I also am, I have sort of the list of things. We talked about core values and worldviews and a little bit of conflict mitigation. But I also wanted to tell you, you mentioned sleep and
Mhm.
you also mentioned burnout. And so I'd like to, that you're going to talk about those. And I think that's right now, I mean, just so much, this is everywhere I go, everywhere I go. It's like sleep and burnout is a big thing right now. So
Yeah. Well, we're talking about liberalism, so and primarily what would people would call the classical version of liberalism. And so it's about the self, right? That's the starting point is the self. And well, what kind of self? Like our best self or not our best self, right? And so how can we improve ourself so then we're a stronger, better, more equipped, more compassionate, more understanding individual as part of a family, part of a community, part of a nation, part of a global world. And so it starts with the very basic things, right? The things that we learn when we're children that are hard to maintain, which is make sure that we're eating properly and we're hydrating and we're getting enough sleep. It turns out sleep is a primary factor in how people are feeling emotionally and mentally and physically in their lives, right? If we're not getting enough sleep, and I don't just mean hours in the day, I also mean the quality. It's not just quantity, it's also the quality of sleep, right? So you have people who might drink a bunch of alcohol and fall asleep, but they're mostly sedated. They're not sleeping. And so in sedation, you're not going to have rapid eye movement for as long as you would if you were actually sleeping, right? And so if what's happening is if we don't sleep enough, if we don't sleep deeply enough, if we are waking up while we're sleeping and having trouble going back to sleep, all these different things, what it does is it dysregulates our circadian rhythm, which is sort of an inbound regulation system that's connected to all of our other systems in our body. So if we're deregulated in our circadian rhythm by not getting good quality of sleep, good quantity of sleep, then we're going to also dysregulate our mood management system, our appetite recognition system, our weight gain and loss system, our blood sugar control system, our hormone production system, right? So a bunch of systems are going to get all thrown off, and then we're more susceptible to burnout. We're more susceptible to becoming much more agitated when we're dealing with conflict. We are going to have a harder time managing the stress in our right, the stressors in our life which bring us stress, right? We need a little bit, like we need a little bit of stress, right? We need a little bit of stress on the bones, or else they become like noodles, right? And anybody who spent any time in a hospital bed knows you've got to be moving in order to maintain, right? You got to plant yourself. You have to have pressure on the bones. Well, we need pressure on our systems in order to strengthen our stress response. But we just also need to be careful about not over responding to stress in our lives. And that's also what happens, right? It's like the burnout happens because people are exerting beyond what is necessary, what their capacity allows for them to deal with. So it's
yeah, that's
possible
what
that
you're talking about, the
they're
regulation, right?
yeah,
Where, yeah.
yeah. So it's like, the threat detection system in the back of the brain is sending a signal, danger, danger, danger. Well, it might not be a dangerous situation. It might just remind us of a dangerous situation we've been in before, or one we've heard about, or one we've seen in the movies or read in a book. And so we need to, is in a very brief period of time, we have to be able to calculate, am I really in danger, or is this something else? Right? Is this something else that my brain is sending me a signal for, so we can recalibrate? It happens very quickly. But if we don't know that we can do that, if we don't attempt to do that, then we might get dragged into um, hypervigilance and catastrophizing and, personalizing things, and then getting very discombobulated in our lives.
Yeah, and I one of the things I talk to my students about, like in almost every class, I find a way to work in the old Yerkes-Dodson curve, where there is a little bit of stress actually enhances your performance,
Yeah.
particularly on a well-practiced task. And so that goes back to your practice. You're practicing, and then when you come up against something that's similar to what you've practiced, and it's a little bit stressful, you actually perform better. And we don't have to run away from every stressor, and we don't have to engage our approach emotions for every potential threat either, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
Like I think we need to talk more to anyone who will listen about this natural threat detection. We have never lived, honestly, in a safer world.
Yeah.
And most people's brains are developed for, the saber-toothed tiger, kind of environment. And so, yeah, our brains are looking all the time, for anything
Yeah.
that might be.
Well, it's hard because for people who are paying a lot of attention to watching television news or cable news or scrolling on a phone through their social media, I don't do any of those things, so I'm not
Yeah.
exposed to that. But for people who are regularly exposed to that, the messaging is, you're in danger. The world
Yes.
is dangerous. People do not accept. They do not accept that we are safer now than we've ever have been, because all they hear is that we're not safe from the environment, right? The climate change, from violent attack, from guns, from the right wingers, from the neo Nazis, from the Antifa, right? It's like one group or another, or one thing or another, and so I think that most people just don't believe it. They haven't read what is it, Pinker's book on the fact that we're actually, safer. And even with some clientologists, like, they're starting to talk about, like, there have been different periods where there's been higher CO2 than there is now. And like, there's different things that are not popular to talk about.
Right.
And so one of the things I love about ILV is that we talk about things that are not popular. And so that's going to come up in this course, right? Because we're going to be talking about things that are about, like, developing the self, strengthening our minds, and being able to be of service, right? To themselves, to the family, to our organization, to the community, to their workplace, whatever it is. And the only way to be able to do that without the burning out is to take care of ourselves, right? Because this work is not easy, right? We face all kinds of adversity in our work. I know I do. I'm regularly getting calls from people saying, well, not really, nobody calls anymore, but I'm getting emails from people who are saying, somebody called us to say that we shouldn't have you as a speaker at our event, or we shouldn't have you, be in attendance at our event. And just wanted to let you know. So there are people out there who disagree with the things that we're saying. And most
And
of the
just to,
time, I don't get cut from those things, but it has happened.
right. And there seems to be some genuine confusion about maybe an idea that you disagree with, or maybe being transiently offended by something and being in danger, right?
Yes.
Being harmed.
Yeah. Yes.
There's a real misunderstanding, or I don't really know. I mean, I don't really know
Yeah.
what's going on there.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. I'm a trans man, so I'm part of what I guess a trans community. There's not really such a thing, but I'm part of this
That's the
larger,
colloquial term, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
part of this larger group of people, very diverse group of people. And I remember hearing about, oh gosh, 5 years ago or more, people would say, especially for trans men, we're invisible. People don't see us because we take testosterone and we just blend in, right? So we're not visible. And it was like, yeah, we have to do things constantly to make our presence known. And not all of us do that, but some of us do. And then what happened a few years ago is it went from we're invisible within FTM community to a broader trans line of thinking around now we're being erased, right? If you
Mm.
remember, people are saying, we're being erased, and I don't remember exactly what was happening for that kind of languaging, but it's right, we're being erased, and um, then it escalated to our very existence is being challenged or denied or threatened, and then I heard people starting to use the word terrorism. So then all of a sudden people were saying it's a form of terrorism, right? Maybe because the some of the laws were just starting to come out. I think it was mostly during President Trump's administration. Now we're being terrorized, right? So we went from invisible to erased to invalidated or to terrorized, and now it's a genocide.
Oh
Is
my
it?
God. And now
There's
that I
a
hadn't heard.
Yeah, so now there's a trans genocide happening, and quite honestly, I don't know what is worse than a genocide. So I'm waiting to see what kind of languaging comes out next.
The
Um,
apocalypse.
perhaps, and I was thinking like if there was a true genocide, you'd think that there would be more action being taken, right? Because a genocide is a terrifying, right? I would imagine that's a very terrifying experience to go through, and you'd
And
think
you
that
would be
people
in
would be doing
hiding. I mean, you would be
everything
hiding.
possible. That's right. But they're
Yes.
not
Yes.
behaving that way. The
Right.
people that it's not behaving that way. So we know it's just right. It's just talk, but it works on people who are less familiar with what is going on, with people who are new to understanding the issues of the community, people who are younger, right? People who are more vulnerable to hearing those kinds of messages. It's going to produce within them a lot of fear and concern. So I'm not really sure why this kind of languaging is being used. I mean, I guess I'm a little bit cynical when I say it might be for donor dollar,
Mm.
you know, efforts by nonprofit organizations who are sending out those messages that I heard like the Human Rights Campaign put out like I don't know, United States travel advisory for LGBTQ people,
Oh,
and the country
yes.
of Canada put out one
Yes.
for their citizens coming to the United States. And I live in Florida, and so there's all these concerns about you know are you safe in Florida? Everything that's
Right.
happening in Florida. So it's like on the ground level, I don't see any different. It's more just what people are saying. So it's right. It's just another way of saying like it might actually be safer now, but that message is not getting out
Yeah.
there.
For some reason, that's not the message that, I mean, as you said before, like, people are watching television or on social media or whatever. Um, you know, how many clicks would you get if you said, I'm living a pretty like safe, happy life in Florida?
Oh,
You
I
know,
I
how
think I
many
get
likes?
hate.
Exactly. You would not get the likes, right? So it's almost like you have to up the negative emotion in order
Yeah,
to
yeah,
get, and that's what people are feeding on right now. And the pandemic
yes,
only worsened that.
yeah, and that's why it's important, in my opinion. Of course, it's important to develop these skills of emotion regulation, distress tolerance, conflict mitigation, these kinds of skills, because we are going to be constantly being defiant in how we're talking, and the people who don't like what we have to say are going to throw everything at us. And so we need to be able to pull ourselves away from screens, take deep breaths, right? Go out into nature, or watch a funny movie, do some laughter yoga, right? Something to pull us out, because I think people, even in the libertarian, classical liberal, whatever, centrist community, are too easily sucked into the the social media back and forth. It's really
Yeah,
easy to get sucked into that.
I think that it's easy to forget that those of us in the middle, whether it's the center right or the center left, we're the majority.
That's right.
But you wouldn't know it.
That's
You
right.
would not know it. We have about 11 or 12% extreme on one side, 11 or 12% extreme on the other side, and they seem to be consuming the middle, like as
Yeah.
appetizers, and then as lunch, and then as dinner, and it's just
Yes.
it's and we really have we really do have. There's more of, if you do, to use the language I shouldn't use, but there's more of us than there are of them.
Yeah.
I don't like to use the in-group out-group kinds of language, but it's true. It's a larger group of and I
Yes.
do think that courses like yours, and the Institute for Liberal Values and that kind of thing, we can have more impact, because this is a large group, and
Yeah.
and it's a place where so many people can feel at home and comfortable and not bombarded by
Yeah.
by those extremes.
We
So
just
are
need
you?
more. We need more push out, right? Further and further push out, because
Yes.
this
This is
minority,
squeezing us. Instead, we
yeah,
need to, yeah,
no, that minority is very authoritarian, very coercive.
yes,
And I mean, just think about a prison. A prison has hundreds of prisoners in them and only dozens of correctional officers. They are
yes.
very much outnumbered, but they have a authority, they have weaponry, right? They have bars that they can close, they have alarms they can sound, right? So a very small group of people keeps a very large, potentially violent, group of people in their place.
So are you going to have articles, a book? Do
Mm.
people need to purchase a book or anything for this program?
No, I want it to be as simple, so to speak, right? Easily accessible. I will be providing resources, of course, that people can follow up with, but I want to make it so that the only pre-work that's going to have to be done is the in-between class, taking the little quizzes just to find out more about yourself, so that you can engage in the conversation during the class. I think people will get more out of it if they learn, oh, this is my style of how I deal with conflict. Oh, and that person, that's their style and their style. And then what we learn together is that all of the ways that we deal with conflict are appropriate given the context.
Right.
Sometimes we do want to avoid. Sometimes we do want to compromise.
Self-censored. Sometimes
We
it's
do,
okay.
right? That's
Yeah.
right. Sometimes we do. So it's not as if one is. Sometimes we want to compete, right? Sometimes we think about things as like, oh, it's better to be collaborative than to be competitive. Well, not always.
No.
It depends on the circumstances. And so part of this too is teaching people, like, everybody's dealing with stressors and strains. Everybody has stress in their life. How are people managing it? Right? And everybody's going to find different ways to manage it, so we can learn from each other, right? Not everybody wants to meditate, right?
I
Not everybody,
definitely do
right?
not want to meditate.
That's right.
I
So people
cannot
say it all the
quiet
time.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can't quiet that.
Yeah. Well,
But
that's the thing about
jogging,
meditation is they don't all require the quieting. But you're right, jogging, right? Doing
jogging
physical
is
exercise.
is
Yeah.
absolutely, I
Yeah.
believe, when I hear what people describe about meditation, I'm like, oh, I
Hmm.
experience that when I'm jogging.
Yeah.
And so it's a, like you were just saying about the way that people manage, other kinds of things. There are
Yeah.
different
That's right.
methods of reaching that kind of whatever.
Yeah.
It's not, I don't think it's a quieting of my mind, but it is I think is close to. So people, I'm sure, have
Yeah.
other things.
Well, we hear things for some people it's flow, right? They're in flow.
Hmm.
For runners they call it the runner's high, right? Our
Yes.
body is producing endorphins, healthy hormones that make us feel good. And now the problem is when people go chasing that,
Right.
right? And so, but that happens, but it's not a cookie cutter solution to how to manage stress, right? Everybody's going to find what works for them. And so I like to basically load people up with here are a bunch of different ways. Try what works. It's like when you look at something online, like sleep hygiene techniques, there's like 12 or 15 things on that list, right? They're giving you
You
all
can't do
these.
them all.
No, but if you could do a couple of them and find out, if that
Yeah.
improves your sleep. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so no homework. Sign
Well,
up with a
yeah.
friend.
Homework
Well, I
just
mean,
in
not
between class.
right, right. But
Yeah.
no pre-course
No.
readings. So
No.
they don't have to do that kind of homework. They're going to do homework, self-reflective kind of homework.
Yeah.
Sign up with a friend. I think they should sign up with a friend because then they can either sign
Yeah.
up with a friend if possible or get a buddy,
Yeah.
or a few buddies, practice with your family or whatever,
Yeah.
spread the
Yeah.
love.
Yeah. I think it'd be fun to have like your whole family,
Yeah.
do the little tests. Like, what's your conflict, resolution style? What are your core values? To go through that exercise. I'm sure that would be a great learning opportunity for family because especially for, children to learn, like, oh, that's my parent, but they're a person who, has things going on and they're motivated by certain values. And I think you said something in the very beginning that's so true, which is normally we don't do these exercises. So we stumble upon our values and our moral foundations when they get trampled on or when they come under scrutiny. And then we find, or we haven't put up good boundaries in our life. And that's when we go, oh, that's important to me. That's a value. And the
Oops.
expectation is, that the other person should just know that. And it's like, oh no, they don't know that. you know?
Well, and I had actually sent you like a little thing, which I think is relevant here. This sort of morality of individual conduct and this balance that's required when we also have to. It isn't just morality isn't just about us. It's
Mm.
also about our community, and
Yeah.
sometimes we sacrifice for the greater good. And how to know when to do that, and feel good about it, feel safe doing it, and yeah, to feel comfortable doing it, to feel like it was the right thing to do, and to have. I mean, I think that the actual quote here is, civilized life consists uh, in a constant overlap of the impersonal, so sort of the community supported practices and individual aims. And there is this
Yeah.
constant, right? Kind of,
Yeah.
and especially if you have a family, you
Mhm.
have to, I mean, I've never had any children, so I can't imagine what that must feel like to be constantly feeling like you are giving yourself over. But I have had research students that they were my kids,
Yeah.
and to sometimes resent it, to sometimes be thrilled to sacrifice something of myself. But that's part of, it's very stressful. It's
Yeah.
and difficult sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, not everybody lives by this idea, but, we have a compact with society. And so we have responsibilities to ourselves, to our family, to our neighbors, to our work colleagues, right? To a certain degree, it's like, if I was a nudist, I couldn't just walk out of my house naked, because that's what I want to do, and nobody should be able to stop me. It's like, well, maybe in a utopian society, but we do have laws about that, right? You can't just show up to work in your pajamas. I mean, unless you work at some of those workplaces where they let you nap all day.
Yeah.
But it's like we have a compact where we need to be able to be civil with each other. We need to be able to get along with each other. And it was really disheartening following it started before, but especially after the 2016 election, right, between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. And the day that those results came in, it's as if people seem to forget that what we need to be able to do is be civil, and we need to be able to live in some sort of harmony, and we need to um, agree to disagree sometimes, and we need, right, and people were getting divorced, people were cutting family members off, neighbors were fighting with neighbors, people at work were having all kinds of conflict. It just brought out the worst in so many people. And it's like, I don't think we've recovered from that. I think it really did
No.
do some pretty major damage to our social structure.
Yeah, there's more than one survey that has asked where researchers have asked a version of these questions, of if you found out that someone at you were about to sit down at lunch, and there was the person that you were going to sit down next to was of the opposing political party. um, a huge number, it's like 80% of people said that they would not sit next to that person.
Wow.
I mean, that is huge. In academia, would you approve a research proposal, or recommend for publication a paper or a proposal that was not in line with your political views?
Mm.
Astronomically, no.
Wow.
And it's mostly on the left. Left-leaning in academia, left-leaning academicians are very much opposed to certain kinds of research findings and certain kinds of research proposals. So I mean, it's now other research has shown in a follow-up, as you were saying, like as a follow-up, like much more like 2018, 2019, they found pretty equal between right-leaning and left-leaning were saying similar things, like that they didn't want to approve of research, but because academia is so much more left-leaning, it's easier to find the effect in left-leaning. But yeah, I mean, people don't even want to sit next to someone at lunch, who might disagree with them politically. This is, again, this is how do you be a contributing citizen? How do you, again, to go back to my example from before, like how do you realize, how do we come to grips with this idea that we are all in the same country, we are all on the same earth, we have so much in common.
That's right. I'm part of a group or organization called Braver Angels.
Yes.
And I went to the Braver Angels convention in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania in July. And there were almost 700 delegates at this convention. That's what they called us, not participants or attendees, but delegates. And we were all wearing these lanyards with our name tags, and the lanyards were either red for people who were conservative leaning, blue for people who were liberal leaning, or Democrat and Republican leaning, and then they had yellow ones for people who were libertarians, and they had white lanyards for people that, due to their job, it was best for them not to advertise their politics. like a minister, the CEO of a company who brought employees with them, right? Like they wanted to remain neutral, right? And what was really great is that we were staying at Gettysburg College. We were meeting in their classrooms. We were eating in their dining halls. We were in their auditoriums. And when we were in the dining hall, right, for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day, it was just table after table after table filled with people with red and blue lanyards sitting all together having discussions. There, I never saw an all red or an all blue table, right? Because the goal of Braver Angels is to eliminate all of this polarization. And so it's a group of people that are, yes, left and right leaning, but have a similar goal in mind. So we all sit together and we break bread, right? It was a beautiful thing to see. It was also really beautiful to see how many people that most people would assume would be one or the other lanyard color, and they were not. They were not, right? And so it was like cowboy looking men with a blue lanyard and a lot of Hispanic and black delegates in red lanyards.
Right.
Not all, of course, but
Yeah.
a significant number. And so that to me, I said, I wish it was like that out in society, because I think it's fear that keeps people, right? I know that there are certain people who are like, no, I'm never going to sit next to that person and talk. But I think most people are afraid because they don't want to say the wrong thing and then get chastised. But if we were walking around and everywhere we went, people were wearing red or blue or yellow lanyards, I think we'd feel more free to talk with each other.
Interesting. Yeah, because it's just out there. We don't have to worry. We don't have to.
That's right.
Yeah.
And people know, like, just because you're wearing a red lanyard doesn't mean that you support the Proud Boys, and just because you're wearing a blue
Right.
lanyard doesn't mean you support Antifa, right?
Right.
You're not. Doesn't mean you're far left or far right. As a matter of fact, I don't think far left or far right people would even show up at a Braver Angels convention.
Probably not. Yes. Yeah. I mean, we were talking about how sad it is that, for example, what the the American flag, that most of us pledged allegiance to the American flag as we were growing up, and
Yeah.
singing the national anthem, it still brings tears to my eyes every time. I get a little choked up. And now it seems like the American flag is, it's a particular political statement now.
Yeah. If you have it on your house, it means something. But
yes.
it was the progressive education reformers that put the flag in the classroom, brought in the Pledge of Allegiance, and they did that. So these were the progressives leading the education reform when they were setting up our schools the way they are now around the country in our public school system. So it's interesting to see. It's interesting to see how different what the progressives stand for now versus what they used to stand for. It's very different.
Yeah. So I just really appreciate being able to have these kinds of conversations, and at ILV being able to talk about what the American flag means to us and that kind of stuff, because you're right. I don't necessarily feel comfortable everywhere talking about it anymore. Even especially at my place of employment, I certainly don't.
Well, and people make assumptions about things. Like they'll make assumptions based on either our race or our perceived race, and perhaps our affiliation with some sort of social category of people, right? It's like, because I'm a trans man, I get assumed to be of a particular thought, right? Oh, you must think this, you must believe this, you must want this, you must not want that. I was raised by a single father who served in the Marine Corps. He was born in Mexico. I'm first generation born in this country. I'm an only child. But for all intents and purposes, I think people just see me as white. I mean, technically, Hispanics are Caucasians largely, but people don't like that sort of demography, so they're sort of wanting to pull out people, call them brown or something like that. But so it's like being in either belonging to or being associated with these different categories. People treat you differently, and so it's like we have to either do something or not do something to help people feel either comfortable with us, at ease. Like, because I know as a person, if I say to somebody I'm trans, I could just see them sort of take a deep breath, like, oh, I hope I
Now
don't
what?
say anything,
Now what? Yeah.
because trans people get really angry when you misgender them. Well, I don't do that. I don't get angry at people. I don't even know what misgendering me would even mean, right? So so it's like I like to do it because I want people to know, like, you can say anything you want. I've been doing public speaking since I was 10 years old. When I was in my late teens and I started doing, like, talking about being part of the lesbian community and then ultimately the trans community, I say to people, you can ask me any question. Nothing's off the table. I might not answer in full a question because I want to leave personal information out, but I'm never going to chastise you or shame you or denigrate you or dehumanize you because you asked me a question. I don't even care how you frame the question. And because that to me is how we get people to open up and trust and be curious, right? Is by inviting them to ask questions and then letting them ask the question how they want to ask the question, right? I hear all the time within LGBT community, that they don't want their tone to be policed or their vocabulary to be policed, but then they're policing vocabulary and
Yes.
tone all over the place. It's
Yes.
it's a confusing situation, to be sure.
Yes. And so, I mean, in this world, you can't eat. I mean, what's the most natural thing you would do when you would meet somebody new? Like, where are you from?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
um,
yeah,
I don't know, so like people hear me and they realize that I'm not a native New Englander, right?
mm,
So
yeah.
um, you must be from somewhere else. And so, I mean, I just, so many questions, like you said. I mean, this is how we get to know each other, how we show
That's right.
interest
That's
in
right.
one another.
Yeah,
And if we can't ask questions of each other, how would you possibly
yeah,
show interest,
yeah.
just be attentive, and
We
trying to
can.
find some common ground
Yeah,
also. I mean, if we're not
yeah.
talking to each other, we're not seeing that we actually do have similar moral foundations,
Mm-hmm.
even if we're motivated by different aspects of those.
That's
We're
right.
not seeing that our commonality, because we're not conversing, we're not asking questions about each other, we're not, it's very sad. I go to a gym that's very conservative. And I didn't know it. I just joined the gym,
Yeah,
and so when they found out that I was a college professor, they of course think I'm
yeah.
like super liberal, right? And there are a lot of people who will not speak to me
Mm,
because they just won't speak to me, and have said some not very nice things. And then I go to my university where I got canceled, and they think that I'm, on the other spectrum. And so they don't want to sit next to me
that's right.
at
That's
lunch
right.
and those kinds of things. So, yeah,
Yes,
I mean, and we are not talking to each other. None of us are talking to each other,
that's right.
in that way. And it makes me sad. The
Yeah.
gym used to be one of my biggest sources of friends, and we're all sweating together. I mean, if I'm laying
you
under
gotta
the,
you gotta find some fun T-shirt that would signal.
yes, you can talk to me. Yes. Yeah. So ask me anything, yeah.
Wear
So
an American flag T-shirt. And that'll.
yes, yes. So, but
Yeah.
as soon as they pick up on a category,
Yes.
right? So I am
Yeah.
in a category, which, I mean, it's not the same as the categories that you're talking about, being,
That's right. No.
Hispanic or trans or whatever, but it is a natural human tendency.
Yeah.
It's how we organize our world, right? The world is very confusing, and
Yeah.
there's all this stuff going on. And so we categorize, you know, and so it's not wrong to categorize, and it's also
Mm.
not wrong to ask people, to be inquisitive and interested in people.
Yeah.
And so we seem to be, I'll tell you what, I wonder now how people, when I go into my college classroom, people do not speak to each other. It used to be you would come into the room and they would be jibber jabbering and
Yeah.
everything, and so they actually kind of didn't like it if the professor showed up early. because it, kind of made them, they wanted to do their little, chit chat and everything. Not anymore. They're sitting there, they're scrolling on their phones like this. So nobody's looking up and it's complete silence. I would say more than half the time, they haven't even turned on the light in the room.
Oh.
They are sitting in the darkness, staring at their screen. So they're not studying together. So this is, you were saying like, oh, you hope people, this is why I was saying like, sign up with a friend, get a buddy in the class. This is not something that young people are practicing.
Wow.
They do not know how to make small talk, to just small little things, maybe get a study buddy. Oh, I forgot my book today. I don't have my calculator, whatever. They don't know how to do that.
Wow. This is making me think about isolation and, as a social worker, when I was working in medical social work, isolation was something that we always had to be very aware of with our patients because, they're getting, a diagnosis of a chronic illness or a disease, and we would help them manage, they had nurses and they had palliative care, but, on the social work side, managing through the distress, the emotions of being told like you've got this thing, you need to change your lifestyle, you need to change your diet. It's like the dietitian is going to handle them with the actual diet, but it's a big shift in their life, and shifts are hard for people. And the isolation and the loneliness, right? It's isolation is not good for our physical health, our mental health, our emotional health, our ability to be in harmony with ourselves and the people around us. It just sounds like a lot of it's withdrawal, which ends right. So it's not that people are not paying attention to them. It's that people are pulling away. But it's
Yeah,
so
as if they're
damaging.
actively trying not to,
Oh
they're
my
actively
gosh.
trying not to. And they walk around campus like that
It's
too.
sad.
They walk
It's
around
really
campus looking at their phones. So there's a new garden on campus, which is lovely. They don't look up, they just keep their
I'm
head
worried
down.
about our future. It's like, how are those people going to be functioning in a job?
I know.
I don't, or in
Well,
a
they
marriage,
all,
or as a parent, or
right. I'm going to tell you
wow.
something I saw that was so sad. This is kind of off topic, but I was leaving a big box store, and this little kid, like the mom's carrying a package, and the little kid is like, mom, look, mom. And the kid is not, they're walking from the, out of the store to the car, and I'm walking the other direction. Mom, you know how little kids can be,
Yeah.
that's like, look at me, look at mom. She had her phone in her hand. I kid you not, this is what she did. This kid is trying to get her attention to show her something. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's probably a dandelion. I don't know. And she leans down and she shows him a picture of himself on her cell phone. Now, the kid is right here. She's not looking at him. She's not paying attention to him. She leans down and shows him a picture of himself on her cell phone and says, look how cute you are. I cannot get this. This was several years ago. I cannot get this out of my mind. Your child is cute right next to you,
Yeah.
but you are distracted by your phone and the picture, a two-dimensional image of your child. And you just taught him that picture, his cuteness on your phone, is more important than that dandelion or whatever it was.
His curiosity,
yes.
His excitement.
Yes.
That's soul crushing.
It is.
Yeah, I was on a subway once when I lived in San Francisco, I think it was, and there was a woman, I'm assuming the mother, sitting with this little girl, and the mother was on her phone the whole time. And this is before we had really sophisticated phones, but it was probably like a BlackBerry or something she was, on. And the kid was, bouncing around, was antsy, was there was no engagement, and they were kind of little, so they couldn't really see what was going by very well. And they got up and they were moving around, and this mother shouted and I think physically reseated the kid in a very, um, heavy-handed, angry way, and I lost it. And I was like, "Excuse me, like you are in public. If you don't want your child to get up and move around, maybe you should pay attention to her." I
Right.
could not, and she came back at me, and I was like, "Don't even start with me. I'm a social worker, and my interest is that child."
Right.
Like, no,
Yeah.
don't even. I've done that many times where I see parents doing things in grocery stores, Target stores, different department stores, and I'm like, I walk right up and say, "Can I help you with something? Because this situation is not working. I'm going to
Right.
call 911." I don't say that out loud, but I'm thinking in my head, I'm going
Yeah.
to call. I'm going to get child welfare down here in a hot second. Like, I have such
Right.
zero tolerance for that. I've just seen too many examples of, you know, little children being berated and belittled and ignored, and physically abused in public, that I literally, again, I have zero tolerance for it. It's a bit
Yeah.
of an Achilles heel, and it's almost gotten me in trouble a couple of times. It's
Well, and this is
Yeah.
where you're,
But
you're trying,
I'm motivated by it.
right.
It's hard
Right.
not to act. I mean, I've gotten better. I find different ways to do it now. This was, is when I was in my 30s. I'm almost 60 now, so I've tamed down. But oof, I still get really, energized by that.
And in the olden days, not that long ago, really, the community really did help raise kids, right? Like neighbors could, tell their neighbors' kids, "Hey, cut that out," right?
Sure.
They could, like send them out of this, like, "Get out of my house, you're driving me crazy, go home," or whatever.
Yeah.
Or, "I'm not putting up with this anymore," or throwing rocks, or whatever it was.
Yeah.
You also knew that you had to behave when you were in your community, because you knew that somebody was
Oh, yeah.
going to tell your parents, right?
Oh, yeah.
And we were much more of a community. And I remember when my niece and nephew were little, so 20 years ago, the neighbors' kids. What brought this to mind was the throwing rocks at the window. And my nephew was in on this. They were throwing rocks into like one of those wells that go into the basement, with a window. It's just egress from a basement, and it's like a well. And they were just picking up the rocks and throwing them, and they were 6 or 7 years old. And so, and my dad went out there, man, and he raised holy hell with all three of them. And he sent, my nephew inside to be, chastised some more in a little bit. And he called those kids next door and, got them by their collars and took them next door and told them, "Do you know that the neighbors called the police on my father because he had, touched their kids?" Now, in my day, my parents they'd been like, "Thank you very much, and we will take it from here."
That's right. That's right.
And
Yeah.
so we've lost this sort of sense of community. And I think that, what you just told me, now, I think you've maybe empowered me a little bit to, like, I wanted to say something to that mother or to the little kid to sort of model, like I could have stopped and said, "Oh, what do you have?" or something. I could have done that to even just kind of intervene a little bit so that maybe she would have interacted with him. But
Well,
yeah,
in
I
other
think
cases, it's multi-generational, right? When I left school, I went to my uncle and aunt's house where my grandmother was watching me and two of my cousins, right? So I was being watched for by other family members.
right.
And if I was out in the neighborhood, it was a similar kind of thing.
Yeah.
There was a little less, it probably would happen days later that somebody would say something to my family about what I had done. It wasn't immediate.
Right.
But it's like in
You
the back
couldn't
of
get
my
away
mind,
with
I knew it
much.
was coming.
You knew it was coming. Yes, yes. Yeah. And I mean, I know, I mean, there's good and bad in
Yeah,
that, but yeah, I think that, I miss the sense of community that,
yeah,
we've just we're so divided now. And I do think that, you know, uh, COVID, made it worse for lots of reasons. So,
well, something that I
um,
have going on here is, living in Florida, we have hurricanes, and
sure. Oh,
so
yes.
it's
And you
helpful
just
to be able
recently,
to, yeah.
you were in you were in a vulnerable area. Am I correct?
We yes, I mean, we didn't have, we with Ian, we lost power. It was a lot of things last year. This one was nowhere near as bad.
Okay.
In our area, it was very
Right.
bad in other areas. But one of the things that happened after Ian is I got phone numbers from several of my neighbors, so that we, for the next time, we can all be they were in touch with each other, but I wasn't part of that network, so I got
Right.
myself into that network. And then, one of the neighbors put a pool in her backyard and then invited us all over for a pool party. And so we have a new neighbor moving in on the side. It's like, I'll invite him to come into the group, because it's not the whole street, it's just like three houses on each side.
Right.
But it's a way for us to like check in on each other, because some houses have generators and some don't, right? Have generators. And so we can help each other out. So because of natural disaster, there's a specific need for people to be in connection and in community with each other. And I've really appreciated that, because
Yeah.
even when there were no hurricanes throughout the year, people were texting about things, that
Right.
were coming up in the neighborhood. And yeah,
Yeah, I like what you said though. You said I got myself into that
that's right.
network,
I had to.
and I think a lot of people don't know how to do that. They don't know how to get back into a network of any kind. I think that they're just
Yeah.
really, a little bit lost, and I see it in the young people that I see at college. But I also do think that it's broader than that. I think people have they're a little bit lost in terms of how to reconnect, how to find a little a little community. And so,
It's so sad, because I have such fond memories of being in college and working in the student union in one of the, student affairs offices, and being part of a student club and being in student government, and like just all of the friendship and the
mhm,
getting together and hanging out, and having lunch together and walking to class together. And there was so much joy in that experience.
I agree.
It's a
I
real bummer
agree.
to hear that people are just so disengaged and
Yeah. Yeah.
distracted.
Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. Bummer.
Well, we need to end on a happy note.
Yes.
So, so other than, is there anything else you want to say about the class? I know that it's in October. It starts. I
Starts
don't
in
know what the
October. I
date
think
is.
I think it's the 19th, which I think, because it starts on a Thursday, and then it's 5 Thursdays in a row, 7 o'clock Eastern PM. So, but there's going to be a short video released talking. I think Jennifer and I are going to talk briefly about the sort of like an introduction to the
Hmm.
course. Um, yeah,
So people can get a feel for how it's
yeah,
going to go.
for
Yeah.
for
Okay.
what to expect, so to
Yes.
speak. I'd say hold expectation at bay, because be more open to whatever's going to happen.
That's
Um,
right. That's right. And
but
we did it. We just I think last week's podcast was just we had talked about an article about preparing yourself for discomfort.
yeah,
At, actually expanded people's willingness uh, to hear opposing messages
yeah,
and to engage with people that they believed would be in disagreement with them. So yeah, so just being aware that you might be that
yeah,
discomfort was actually a sign of personal growth, was a
yeah.
sign that you were learning something, as opposed to discomfort being something, like as we mentioned before, something to be afraid of, something to withdraw from. But discomfort in small doses can actually be really
That's right.
um, a positive thing.
It's not something to shut down,
Right.
right? It's like like, I'm uncomfortable. You need to stop. It's like, oh no, no,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
nice.
Okay. So, any, oh, I did know, I will, think maybe we should close on this. I noticed that you had linked on your webpage to the Gallup poll, the workplace poll about the difference between wellness and well-being. So I think a lot of us, as have, relates to what you meant, a lot of us maybe focus a lot on wellness. We may be like, oh, we make our smoothies or whatever,
Yes,
but what's well-being? Because that's really a big part of your work, right? Not just wellness, but well-being.
that's right. Yeah, well, most people, when you think about wellness, I think a lot of people think the terms are synonymous. So I appreciate
Yes.
the clarification, right? Because wellness is more about um, not being sick, right?
Right.
It's you're living a healthy lifestyle, so to speak, um, and you have the capacity, the energy, the time to be able to do the things that you want to do. And so I think paying attention to well-being increases or improves your wellness, right? Wellness is sort of like an overall, whereas with well-being, it's looking more at the day-to-day. It's looking at our social well-being, right? Do we have meaningful connections to people in our life? Our financial well-being. Are we earning enough for what it is we need, or are we living beyond our means? Are we just not able to make enough to make ends meet? Right. So paying attention to that. Also, our physical well-being, right? So making sure that we're stretching and we're moving and we're getting our blood flowing and we're taking care of what we eat and making sure we're hydrated, and then also our community well-being. So it's about being engaged in whatever way that fits us, right, suits us in our communities. That could mean your neighborhood, the street you live on. It could be the larger neighborhood, the city, the county, the state, the nation, whatever it is. Like, how do you define? It could be if you're right, when you're a professor, a lot of times people, their community where they spend a lot of their time is the college campus, right? So like whatever you define. So it's looking at these dimensions of our life. Our careers are another dimension, right? The career well-being. So it's looking at the how we are functioning in all of those different areas of our life. And when we're functioning well in all or most of those areas of our life, we will have more wellness in our life. So it's sort
So
of
yeah,
like macro and micro, I guess.
yeah. So if you want to check in with your moral foundational well-being and your emotional regulation well-being, and your even your liberal values well-being, you should sign
That's
up
right.
for Zander's
That's right.
course, and we'll put some links in the podcast notes so that people can check those out.
Perfect.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been wonderful being a guest on the show.